أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونشكره ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم. So no convention is complete without the prerequisite marriage talk. And I think it's a beautiful component of conventions, conferences, educational seminars, because marriage is the cornerstone of our communities. Marriage is the foundation that if we are able to strengthen our marriages, if we are able to make sure that that foundation is secure, then we will see the ripple effect of that sense of security and that solid foundation moving outwards into our communities, into our societies, into our masajid, into our schools, and most importantly, into the lives of our children and their children and their children. And this is why it is important to address the topic of marriage. And this is why no matter how many times we talk about marriage, there is always something that we can glean from it, something that we can apply to our own lives or possibly advise others of. But it's always interesting to me that when we talk about the topic of marriage, particularly at conferences and programs such as this at the New Jersey Dawah Conference, we talk about seeking something in the marriage. In this case, it's about seeking tranquility in order to find happiness in marriage. Many times we buy into this cultural notion that we've been fed, that happiness is what we need to seek, that being in a relationship, being in a marriage is defined as successful if the couple is happy. But what does it mean to be happy, and particularly in the marital relationship? The definition of happy is one that can differ for each person. But what we see in Hallmark movies, in the Christmas commercials, the family standing together and singing, what we listen to in music, in movies, in books, that is fed to us as this is happiness, is not necessarily what we should be seeking. Because what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises us of finding in marriage is tranquility. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises us of seeking in this dunya is contentment. And when we shift our lens from seeking happiness to instead seeking contentment, we find something very beautiful in the process, and that is gratitude. And when we find that path of gratitude through the way of contentment, we find tranquility. When we look at the verse in the Quran that is frequently referenced as the marriage verse, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes how our marriages should convene and for what purpose. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes for us that marriage relationship as a place, لِتَسْكَنُوا إِلَيْهَا, a place in which we can dwell in tranquility. How do we dwell in that tranquility? Not by seeking happiness, not by being happy, but by implementing mawadda wa rahma, by implementing care and mercy. And when we look at the terminology of the root word of litaskanu, we see that it is the root word of suqoon, or sakan as well. And we know that the term sakan refers to a place of dwelling, a home, a place where you find rest. And we also know that when we are reading the Quran and we are implementing the rules of tajweed, when we come to alamat al-suqoon, the sign of the suqoon, we rest, we stop, we catch our breath, so that we may continue in reading the rest of the ayah. Our marriages are very much like that. Our marriages are meant to be that place where we catch our breath. They are not to be a place of constant running, of constant movement. They're a place where we're meant to stop, to reflect, to pause. But when we run after the concept of happiness, as defined by our society, as defined by the music and the books. I believe there's a song even that tells you to do what when you're happy? To clap your hands, right? Not to take a breath, not to rest, not to pause, not to reflect, but to move, to be active, to be loud. And this is the way that the concept of love has been defined for us as well. It's been defined for us as this place of passion, of intense emotion. So much so that we see whenever we talk about marriage, whether it's in conferences or in MSAs on different college campuses, whenever there is a talk about marriage, a talk about love, a talk about gender relations, oftentimes there is one color that will stand out on the flyer. There is one color that the students will decorate the room with, the auditorium with. And that color is red. Why? Now, subconsciously, we may not make the connection. We may think, well, it's a nice color, it's cheerful, it's happy. But when we look to something such as the fighting of the bulls in Spain, we see the matador holding in front of the eyes of the bull a cloth. What color is that cloth? Red. It's not because the matador wants the bull to fall in love with him. Instead, and what's really interesting is to note that bulls are actually colorblind. So it's not the color that's intended to incite the bull. Instead, the color red is intended to incite passion in the audience. Again, not an emotion of love, but excitement, intensity, fear, anger even at the bull. But this raising of emotions that's encompassed in the color red. And yet we are fed the ideal that our relationships should also embody those feelings, the color red. Because happiness is about clapping your hands. Happiness is about that excitement, that emotion. That's not contentment. That's not tranquility. That's not marriage. Our marriages are places where we are meant to find that comfort. But that doesn't always happen. We don't always find that tranquility in our relationships. Why? Because we are so frequently focused on what we are missing or what we don't have. We are so frequently focused on trying to attain that ideal that is not meant to capture the relationship between husband and wife as described in the Quran. We are so focused on attaining the unattainable that we lose sight of what we have in front of us. And we lose that sense of contentment. And in that process of trying to achieve the unattainable ideal, we do this. We begin to point fingers and say, it's because of you that our marriage is failing. It's because you don't understand. It's because you don't listen. It's because you care for your siblings more than you care for me. It's because you work all day. It's because you don't cook well. It's because the house isn't clean because of you. And when we point like this at our spouse, we forget to stop and see that there are 3 other fingers pointing back at us. There are 3 fingers begging us to look inside and to see, what am I doing? What is my role in this relationship? What changes can I implement to bring this home closer to that place of tranquility? What am I looking towards? What am I hoping to achieve that I don't have now? And what can I do to work towards that with the focus of pleasing Allah, with the focus of loving my spouse, not in that mediated form of loving that we've come to associate with the word love, that intense passion, that emotion that's unbridled, but with a love that's anchored in the love of Allah, with a love for someone that is focused on pleasing Allah through the mu'amala, through the interaction with the person that we are in that relationship with, in the marital relationship. How do we attain that? How do we get to that place where we can look at our spouse and we can say, I truly love you for the sake of Allah? It's not always easy, because there are moments that we will look at our spouse and we might say, what was I thinking? There are moments where we look at our spouse and, one person wakes up with really bad morning breath. One person wakes up and their hair is a mess. One person wakes up and you're just like, wow, you don't look at 35 the way you looked at 25. How do we step away from that need or that desire to achieve that unattainable, elusive happiness and find that place of contentment instead? Find that place of rida. It's by recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us our spouse to be a blessing. Maybe that blessing is in the form of a test, but it's still a blessing. Maybe that blessing is in that sense of connection and tranquility that we are able to achieve. Maybe that blessing comes in a form that's difficult to see at first, but it's still there. And that's how we are able to look past our expectations and our anticipation and our falling into that restlessness of needing to find something, and see instead what we have in front of us. See instead what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, and recognize that in that is our blessing. Because those moments are going to happen, the ups and the downs and the all over the place with our relationships. I look at couples sometimes and I see that, between the wife and the husband, there's 6 kids. And the question becomes, how does the wife get to the husband, or how does the husband get to the wife? Or between the wife and the husband, there's a job where they're working, both of them are working, from, forget the 9 to 5, it's from 5 a.m. until 9 p.m. now. Or there's in-laws, or there's the masjid sometimes, there's society, there's things going on, there's this and there's that, there's this social engagement and that social engagement, and you see the distance, and the distance, it grows and it grows and it grows. Why? Because the sense of tranquility between the husband and the wife has not established. The coolness of one another's eyes has not been reached. Instead, there is this run, this constant run, to find what? To find happiness. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created each and every one of us with a certain emptiness, a certain longing, a feeling of wanting something to fill a void in the heart. Some of us will try to fill that void with wealth. Some of us will try to fill that void with the love of fame. Some of us will try to fill that void with the love of another. But that void is meant to be filled with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How do we attain that? Through being content with what Allah has blessed us with. When we talk about attaining contentment in the marital relationship, this is not to be equated with saying, okay, you have an abusive spouse, just be content, this is your test, and in it there's a blessing. No, because we know that in our deen, it is incumbent upon us to speak out against oppression and to stop oppression in any way that we can. So we're not talking about a relationship in which there is oppression and we tell someone, then be content, this is your relationship. We're talking about the relationship where husband and wife have within them the capacity and the willingness to truly enact mawadda wa rahma, care and mercy towards one another. But they withhold it. or they are not able to give it because they feel that happiness exists somewhere else. How do we overcome that? The Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam advised us that the best of you is the best to your family. But how many of us can honestly say that we save the best parts of ourselves for our family? You know, I see younger students, younger university students, for example, at the MSA events, at the programs that the colleges have, and I look at them and you see them and you're like, wow, they must have spent hours, you know, the young women fixing their hijab, making sure it's perfect, the young men combing their hair, putting on their best outfit. And then you fast forward to maybe, 6, 7, 8 years later, and they're married. And you ask the spouse, well, do you beautify yourself for your spouse at home? They're like, no, I'm comfortable. I can just be me. I can wear my ripped sweatpants. I can, it's okay if I don't shave for a week or two. It's okay if I... Why? The best of you is the best to your family. A while back, my husband and I were together one time. We were shopping in a mall, and we happened to spot someone that we knew from the community, and we started to head towards the individual. And as we were heading towards him, we saw him speaking to his children and his wife, and he seemed to be in a rush, and so he was kind of yelling at them, خلصوني كفاية shopping, خلاص طلعتوا عيني, and they was a bit upset, stop, finish, you're taking forever, enough shopping. And so, we slowed our pace a little bit. And then from the opposite side, I guess one of his co-workers was approaching. And as the co-worker approached and said, oh, hey, Mo, how's it going? The brother turned away from his family, and he knows that I share this story, so it's okay. Turned away from his family and turned to the coworker, and all of a sudden his face lit up. I said, oh, hi, how are you? It's so nice to see you. Let me introduce my beautiful family, my lovely children. And we're like, oh, mashallah, that's lovely. He's introducing the family. And so, the coworker left, and we began to approach again, and again he's like, "Jatkum al-araf, dan tutawiltu awi," and he started shouting at the children again. And so, in that moment, I think it's a moment of realization for all of us. How many of us truly save our best smile for our spouse? How many of us save our kindest words, our nicest perspective for our spouse and our children? Or do we tend to turn that externally and give the world our best so that when we come home, there's nothing left? When we come home, we've already given the best part of us to our coworkers, our colleagues, to the masjid, to the community. And now our spouse gets the grumpy face, gets that, I'm exhausted, don't talk to me, I'm tired. Where is the mawadda and rahmah in that relationship? It's not there because we're not saving the best of ourselves for our spouses. And we're allowing the daily grind, the continuous demands of our lives, whether it be our children or it be our coworkers or our colleagues or whatever it is that we're going through in the dunya, to take away from what can be a path towards Jannah in the akhirah. Because that's what our spouses are for us. They can be a means of getting closer and closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we only allow those moments in our marriage to be a form of worship. How? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easy for us. Simply taking a piece of food, a piece of bread, and placing it in the mouth of our spouse can be seen as sadaqah. We talk about the smile being sadaqah to those around us. Imagine then how much the smile counts to those that are closest to us, to our family members, to our spouse, to our children. Don't be stingy with that smile. When Sittina Aisha radiallahu anha was asked about the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam and how he spent his time, she responded and said that when he is not in worship, he is in service to his family. What does it mean to be in service to your family? To be there, to be kind, to be caring, to give that best part of you to your family. That's how you attain tranquility. Yet today we're so caught up in everything that surrounds us, we lose sight of what's most important. When I was doing my research years ago for my book on divorce, I had received this message from a couple that said to me, we heard that you're interviewing couples, and we'd like to be a part of this study. And I said, okay, and I asked them information, and they said, we've been married for 50 years. And I was very upset because I said, you've been married for that long and you're thinking of divorce? And so they responded and said, no, we just want to tell you how to do it right. So I said, okay, well, I'll speak to you. So I went to speak with the couple, and it was amazing. They were that cute couple who they complete each other's sentences, and they seem like they're sitting close to each other, like you could feel the connection. And so I asked them, I'm like, okay, what is it? What is it that has kept your connection so strong over the years? And the response surprised me. I thought they were going to say, it's our faith, it's our iman, it's our salah, we wake up and pray fajr together. The response was Post-its. And I remember I was like, Post-its? That's a little strange. Why Post-its? And so they responded and said, prior to the 1980s, there were no Post-its. And we used to want to leave notes for each other. But when we'd write on a piece of paper, the paper would fall, we couldn't find it, something would always happen. And then they invented Post-its. And since that day, not a day has gone by that we haven't left each other a message. And I'm like, what do these messages say? And so the husband said, I might leave her a message, a note, a Post-it on the pillow that says, I'm still mad at you, but I love you anyway. The wife said, I might leave him a Post-it on the dashboard that says, the joke you told last night was so funny, I'm still laughing. Or I might leave a Post-it in his lunch that says, your eyes are still as beautiful as the first day we met. And I thought to myself, we live in an age of communication. We live in an age where we've got our smartphones, we've got our laptops, we've got our iPads, we've got all these ways of communicating and connecting. We live in an age where pre-marriage, prior to marriage, we've got teens and young adults who can't wait to text each other, snap each other, send messages to one another in some form or shape. But as soon as we enter into the marriage relationship, that seems to go out the window. And oftentimes when I have couples come into our counseling center, one of the first things we'll do is I ask them to take out their cell phones and to look up the last message they sent each other. And 9 times out of 10, the message is something like, you forgot to pick up the milk, ... again. Or take out the trash when you come home, it's Tuesday, right? Or very functional messages. And you find that the form of communication that has devolved in our relationships is a communication that is functional. And that the emotional quotient no longer exists. So that there are no more messages about what you admire about the spouse. There are no more messages of appreciation, no more messages that lead to that path of tranquility. And so this is an exercise that I usually recommend in these sessions. Take out your cell phones and send a message to your spouse. If you're married, if you're not married, send a message to your parent, send a message to your child, send a message to someone you love, someone you care about. And don't let it be about taking out the trash or picking up the dry cleaning. But send a message that reminds that spouse that you love them for the sake of Allah. And that there are things about your spouse that you are truly content with. Things that make you happy. And we put that happy in quotation marks. Because that happiness needs to be viewed as rida, as contentment. Not as that elusive happiness that we described before. Now, the last time I did this exercise, it was interesting because as soon as the message was sent, and it was a separate lecture, so there was a lecture for the males and then a lecture for the women. As soon as the males sent the message, all of a sudden, all their phones were ringing, and they were all answering, and they were like, "No, honey, I didn't do anything wrong, I promise." And it's because it's become so rare for us to reach out and connect with our spouses in a way that is meaningful. In a way that takes us beyond the functional and into the emotional. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran describes to us the marital relationship in a way that no other relationship is described. And it's described in the form of they are your garments and you are their garments. What does it mean to be libasun for one another? When we look at our clothing and we feel it, it feels soft to the touch. It feels comfortable. It's the closest thing to our bodies. It protects us from the weather, from the elements. It protects us from the eyes of others. It protects us from that sense of vulnerability. But even more so, it beautifies us. We don't select the ugliest outfit possible and come to the New Jersey Dawah conference wearing it. We select what feels good both in texture, but also in terms of how it presents us. That's what the marriage relationship is described for us as in the Quran. As garments that cover one another, that beautify one another, that allow one another to be vulnerable only with the other person, but that protects them from vulnerability with the outside world. That's what true tranquility is. Now, when we look at the terms of mawadda wa rahma, we begin to understand the steps needed to achieve that sense of tranquility. You know, the term mawadda, when you look at the root word of it, you see that the root word is wid, which is the same root word of al-wadud, the name that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls himself by to describe the love that he has for his creation. And it's the same word that is used in that verse in the Quran that explains to us the marriage relationship. Because the love that a husband and a wife should have for one another is a love that can't be described in a term like hubb, or one of the other terms that may in definition can be translated as love. Mawadda encompasses care, it encompasses love, but it also encompasses something beyond. And it's interesting because a while back I was speaking to a professor who's a linguist, and he said to me, I love the Arabic language because there are words in the Arabic language that you cannot find anywhere else, and that we've co-opted into the English language because their meaning is so rich. And so I looked at him and I said, okay, what is that? Like, what word? And so he said, do you know where the word wedding came from? I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, the verb for wedding is to wed. You know, when you marry someone, you wed them. And he was like, and wed actually comes from wid, which is the Arabic word that describes the marital love. And here I was, someone who has read this ayah many times, who never really reflected on the beauty of that term mawadda. But it's the only relationship in which that wid is described as that human emotion of love. That's how we seek that path of tranquility. That's how we come to that place of contentment. It's by recognizing that the relationship between husband and wife is a relationship like no other. It's by being able to step back and to stop pointing that finger, but instead to look at the fingers that are pointing back at us. It's about being able to put aside our ego, being able to put aside our need and our desire to fill the hole within us with the expectation that another person will make us happy. And instead to fill that hole with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to get closer to Allah through our actions, our good deeds towards that person. That's how we find that path to tranquility. But what do we do in the here and now? How do we change our state if we are living a life, a marital life, that's difficult? If we are living in a situation where we say, yes, yes, I understand, but my spouse just doesn't understand. My spouse can't implement this. He doesn't. One of the common factors that we'll often look at in our marriage counseling is how a person understands the concept of love. What does it mean to see love, to experience love, to feel that essence of love? And we use the term love because in the English language, it's the one word we've got to describe that relationship. When we look at the different types of love that can exist in a relationship, we begin to better understand not just our needs, but the needs of our spouse as well. And we see that there are 5 different types of love. There is a love that is expressed in the form of gifting. There's a love that's expressed in the form of time. There's a love that's expressed in the form of service. There's a love that's expressed in the form of touch. And there's a love that's expressed in the form of affirmation. If I am a person who speaks the language of service, and my spouse speaks the language of gifting, what may happen is that a couple comes into our counseling center and the wife may say something like, "He never buys me anything. Never, not a bouquet, not flowers, not necklace, nothing." And we may look at the husband and say, "Okay, what do you have to say for this?" And he'll say, "I just vacuumed the whole house, woman. What more do you want?" In that case, there is someone who is speaking the language of gifting, not in a materialistic way, but that they feel that sense of love when someone gifts them with something. And the spouse is speaking the language of service. When we hear someone saying, "She never says anything nice about me. She doesn't compliment, the clean shave that I have on my beard today. She never notices when I'm wearing a new outfit." And the spouse may respond and say something like, "Well, it's not like I have time. I have no time for this. It's not like you give me any time to do that." We see that one person is speaking the language of time and one is speaking the language of affirmation. Know your language. Know yourself. In our premarital counseling classes, we speak quite extensively on the topic of how we often will hear young couples or people who are in the process of marriage facilitation saying, "I need to get to know him. I need to get to know her. How else will I know if our marriage will succeed?" But we need to step away from that idea of knowing the other person and start learning how we can know ourselves, how we can be familiar with who we are, what we want, what we need, where we're going in life, and most importantly, what is the state of our heart and our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where are we spiritually? Where is our level of contentment? What is it anchored to? And how can we mobilize that anchor to expand it and find a place of tranquility in a relationship with another, in a marital relationship with another? Because until we're able to know ourselves, we will never be able to know someone else. And the way we know ourselves begins with knowing our relationship with Allah, knowing the strength of that relationship before we embark on strengthening a relationship with someone else. In the final few minutes that I have with you today, I just want to stress the importance of recognizing that our marriages are not supposed to be a constant struggle. Our marriages are not meant to be a place of strife, of discomfort, of constant fighting. That's not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed it. Our marriages are meant to be a space of tranquility. They're meant to be a place where when we look at our spouse, we feel that coolness and that comfort. They're meant to be a place that emulate the example of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam in his relationship with Khadija radiallahu anha, with his relationship with Aisha radiallahu anha, in his relationship with Salama, in his relationship with his wives. That's what our marriages are supposed to look like. And if they don't look like that, this is the time that we have to stop. And we have to ask why. And what can I do to make it better? And if you feel that if you reach that point where you've done your part and you have tried and you have tried and you have tried, don't give up just yet. Seek help. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes puts us in a place or surrounds us with people at a time in our lives that are meant to help us. Seek counseling, seek guidance, seek the input of someone who is knowledgeable, preferably not a family member, but someone who is knowledgeable, who can help guide you, who can get your marriage and your relationship to that space of tranquility. Because when you achieve that sukoon in your marriage, then you truly understand the end of that verse, which is that our marriages are a sign for those who know or those who give thought. And they're a beautiful sign of the miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in bringing two hearts together for the love of Him and for the sake of worshipping Him. Jazakum Allahu khair. Wassalamu alaikum.